It's great to speak to you all this morning, so soon from last month. Obviously means last month wasn't a complete car crash. So this morning we're going to be looking at John 16 verse 33. And in that Jesus says, "I have told you these things so that you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble. But take heart, for I have overcome the world." So that's the text for this morning. The question in which we are going to seek an answer is, why does a good God allow bad things to happen? Given it is a first Sunday, we focus on something different to our usual sermon series. Last month we investigated to see whether Jesus was really who he said he was. We looked at the evidence of his existence, the veracity of his claims, his history of his disciples, and what that means to us in the 21st century. This morning we will again be taking a different approach, and we have quite the mountain to climb. The title is the question in which we will be investigating, and that question is again, why does a good God allow bad things to happen? We're going to attempt in 20 minutes what theologians have failed to do for centuries. We're going to explain, explore, and hopefully answer the issue of suffering in the world. I know it's quite the task that lies ahead of us, but why does a good God allow bad things to happen? That is the question we are going to be seeking an answer to, and that is the question which has been a target of discussion, debate, and in some cases death over the years. But why are we looking into it? Well, it is the number one reason that non-Christians have for not turning to faith when it comes down to it. And so, if you're a believer, our exploration this morning may help. And if you're a non-believer, our joint exploration is something in the matter of answering your questions. Maybe put some anxieties to rest and bring some barriers down on the issue of faith. In point one, we will look at the two types of suffering in the world, both man-made and natural. We'll put forward a case and an argument as to why the world is broken. In point two, we're going to seek to address the issue of man-made suffering. And in point three, we shall look at natural suffering and the figure of Jesus. So, let us release our theological inhibition and dive straight into discussing, debating, and hopefully not putting anyone to death. Point one, the two types of suffering. The issue of human suffering is truly the mothership. Although it isn't exactly a soft launch into the sermon and the new year, forget tidings of comfort and joy, that was so 2 weeks ago. This question, the question of suffering, is a big one. It is the Bigfoot. It's elusive, it's hard to pin down, and it's the center of a lot of thought. If we picked a spiritual spade and started digging at this question, the first rock we would hit is establishing if there is even a God in the first place who would then allow so much suffering. The existence of God is a topic well established by the people standing at this lectern, and should you be in any doubt, talk to the person on the right or left of you during tea and coffee later. However, it's not an issue that we can brush aside, as we're going to address it when talking about the issue of suffering. We must first look at some universal laws in order to establish if there is a universal God. Now, my career as a scientist was ruthlessly terminated before it had even begun. At the tender age of 14, my science teacher advised me to take my study of physics no further and focus my efforts elsewhere. The subtext of that report being that, having had me in his classroom for the past year, he didn't believe I understood the basic fundamentals of physics well enough in order to advance my study onto more difficult levels. This was a point in which I disagree with vehemently, as my grasp of basic physics was obviously good enough as the paper aeroplanes that I made at the back of the class flew with such accuracy. But alas, I can boast no formal education in the matter of physics or its universal laws. I have, however, read about a man who does in fact know both of those things. His name is Isaac Newton. And he states in his universal laws of motion, in Law 3, that if one force is exerted, the second object must exert an equal and opposite force. And given this is a universally accepted principle, we can deduce that because there is so much suffering in the world, there must be an equal and opposite force. We know there is suffering and we know there is evil, which means there must be a source of goodness and righteousness. This is a basic scientific way of looking at the existence of God. However, why does that goodness and why does that righteousness let suffering and evil in the world take place? Well, let's go digging. If you asked a Christian why there is suffering in the world, you'd usually get back, not always, but usually get back something along the lines of, there was Adam and Eve, and they ate an apple, bad apple, and they fell out the garden, and because they fell out the garden, the whole world is broken, and that's why your life is hard. But don't worry, I know a person called Jesus who will make your life much better. And it's a good point. It's not entirely inaccurate, but it doesn't exactly hit the mark of answering it, why you have the feeling of disaster, despair, and death. The fact that some people thousands of years ago ate an apple in what seems like a Snow White-esque drama doesn't really hit the comforting mark when you've lost your job, your partner breaks a leg, or a loved one receives a terminal diagnosis. Aha, says the Christian. Most of the suffering in the world is man-made. There is enough food in the world for everyone to eat, but it's humans who are inflicting the suffering and not distributing it accordingly. It's a very good point. Or they may go on. Just look at the last century. China, Germany, Russia. Look how much suffering they have inflicted. That wasn't God, that was man. Again, another good point. And Mao, Hitler, and Stalin did in fact inflict a lot of suffering, murdering millions, separating families, inflicting torture. And if you really want to discover the sheer horrors of human-inflicted suffering, I would not recommend, but look into the Japanese Imperial War Research Center called Unit 731. And if you don't want to feel physically sick for the rest of the day, just take my word for it. Humans can do bad things. And yes, a lot of human suffering is man-made. If we were all kinder, more tolerable, more forgiving to one another, much of our affliction in the wider world would go away. And that would be absolutely helpful for mankind. But it doesn't solve the whole issue of suffering. Yes, humans do cause suffering. Yes, humans cause the majority of suffering, but not all of it. What about the parasitic fly, which whole life cycle revolves around burrowing into the eyes of children from the inside out, eating their way through the eyeball, ending in blindness, untold pain, and suffering in the children it randomly afflicts? Man didn't create that. Or what about the deer, who in recent storms had a tree fall upon it, breaking and trapping its leg under a branch, leading it to confused agony, for it only to be unable to move, causing it to die of starvation in the slowest possible way? Man didn't create that. And by the faces I'm getting, you weren't expecting this morning. Or, what about... Happy New Year, everybody. What about the mother cradling the head of her 10-year-old who is has chronic leg pain, who is informed by the doctor in the white coat that her child's pain has been diagnosed as osteosarcoma, a type of bone cancer which is usually curable, but given the rapid spread of cancer in her child, the survival rate sits about 30%. What do you say to her? It wasn't humans that developed that bone cancer. And suddenly, a story of a garden, a bad apple, and two people named Adam and Eve make even less sense. It isn't due to bad political actors, failed nations, corruption, or power which leads to these things. These aren't human-made. Why would a good God allow that insect to eat its way through the eyeball of children, or let the deer die in confused agony, or inflict cancer upon a child who can do absolutely nothing about it? Well, they're pretty good questions. And what we want to do this morning is put the best case forward that we can against this good God idea, hold nothing back when attacking the argument of suffering, and to give the very best opposition that we could. We have established that. We've dug such a deep hole with deer and eyeballs that we're going to need a lot of effort to climb out of it. Brings us to point 2. We've now established the two main sources of suffering. human and natural. So let us look at the human-made suffering. If we were to pluck the low-hanging fruit on the issue of suffering, although not pluck the low-hanging apple, because if anything this morning we've learned that apples are bad, if we did, we'd find ourselves at James 1, chapter 1, verse 2 to 4. And it says, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kind, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." James is saying here that some of your suffering in which you encounter will be a bid to improve an element of your faith. You can be put in a situation of turmoil to build your resilience on the Lord and not yourself. You can be put in anguish over an uncertainty to deepen your relationship through prayer. You can be put in a metaphorical wilderness so that through your trials you may become the person that God wants you to be in order for you to do the work that is set out for you. But these are three examples, all reliant on your own choices, on how you respond to the suffering. But why do we even have a choice? Why would God allow those situations to happen? Why wouldn't he just sort us all out? Well, that brings us on to the topic of love. We have a choice to love God or a choice not to love God. The ability to love comes with the equal decision not to love. And what makes the decision to love so special is that we have the ability not to. And that's because we have autonomy and agency and therefore free will. We both have the capacity to love, but also the capacity for evil. And it's up to us what we do. If we remember Newton's third law of equal and opposite force, we recognize we have the capacity for evil within each of us and as the human race. But if God removed that capacity for evil, he would also remove that capacity for love. You cannot separate the two. If we have no capacity for love, God would then have to force us to love him, which is impossible. Because if God is love, you cannot be forced into it. Forced love is an oxymoron. So keeping our ability to love, he also keeps our ability for evil. If you're following me. For example, in the midst of the Nazi regime of rounding up the Jews and sending them to death in a concentration camp, why didn't God put his foot down? When there was a mass famine in Ethiopia in the 90s, why didn't God put a stop to it, make all the politicians spread out the grain? All in all, why didn't God stop the evil happening in the world? But which freedom are you suggesting that he takes away? If he were to stop people doing evil, he would take away their free will, which means taking away our free will, and then we would just be robots, and with no decision or choices to make. God cannot force you to love him. And God is love, obviously, as we have established, so therefore there can be no forcing. So perhaps this analogy would help with all this love, force, and evil and chat. When a child goes into their late teens or early 20s, there will come a time where they must leave the house and start their own life, be it traveling, university, or a job. The parent has spent the last 2 decades nurturing, instructing, and guiding them, and must take a difficult backseat to now let the child live their life. It is now over to them. And the child may do things, become embroiled in a situation that the parents would have told them to not do or avoid, but ultimately it's no longer their role. It's now over to the child. An immensely difficult transition, but not too dissimilar to our relationship with God. He taught us and instructed us in the best way to live. He gave the Israelites the 10 Commandments, he sent the prophets throughout the Old Testament, and now we have Jesus. More on him later. But like the parent, he's shown us the best way to live. And like a child, it's now up to us to take it on board. We can decide to continue the ways we were taught or reject them and go our own way. And so, on that basis of free will, we can answer why bad people can do bad things. From murdering dictators to school bullies, God has shown us how to live. And he says he will judge evil. But in the meantime, it's our choice of what to do. Which brings us to point 3, Jesus. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and as one from whom men hid their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he has borne our grief and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. He was oppressed, he was afflicted. He opened not his mouth. Sounds something like the Apostle Paul would write. But no, it's Isaiah chapter 3, prophesying the death of Jesus some 700 years before he was born. Let's look again at those key words. Despised, rejected, sorrows, grief, pierced, crushed, chastised, wounds, oppressed, afflicted, and ultimately slaughter. More heavy stuff. And all of these came true, which, when we are experiencing suffering, we know that God too has suffered. Have you ever wondered or considered the way Jesus died? When broken it down, is possibly the worst way in which you could go, both physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Obviously, there was the pain. The Romans knew how to kill people, and that is why crucifixion was often deployed. It is the most painful way to die. You are nailed to a bit of wood, and you can take days to suffocate to death. There's also the fact that Jesus knew his death was coming. Imagine knowing the hour that your death would come, and you inch towards it. He also knew that he would be betrayed by one of his friends, a disciple named Judas, who sold him for 30 pieces of silver. Imagine that, one of your in-group of friends betraying you. He was then also rejected by another friend, a follower of Peter. Totally rejected 3 times. Yes, imagine that. Imagine in your darkest hour and your friend publicly rejects you. He was then also exchanged for a prisoner who everyone knew was guilty, and he was the innocent man. He was the innocent party. He had done no wrong. But yet he was being crucified instead of a convicted criminal. And that's before him taking the earth's sins upon him. And so we know all of these experiences. We know the pain, we know the betrayal, we know the rejection. They are all human emotions in which Jesus, the Son of God, felt. And so we know when we are suffering, we can bring it to God, safe in the knowledge that he has experienced the same or far worse. There is no distance from this omnipotent, omnipresent being in which we call God. He has been there, he has felt what you have felt, and he is here to help. Psalm 23 says, "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they will comfort me." Which brings us to our conclusion. What have we learned this morning? What can be gleaned from our whistle-stop tour of the issue of suffering? We first discussed Newton's third law of equal and opposite force. There's clearly a lot of evil and suffering in the world, which means there must be an equal and opposite force of goodness and righteousness. We've learned that much of the suffering in the world is man-made. No doubt about it. We've learned that despite witnessing the horrors of humanity, if God waded in and stopped those people, he would be taking away their agency at that time. But in doing so, he has shown us how to live, and he has shown us how to act on an individual level, and we know that he will come to judge. But what about the non-human suffering? Why are there car crashes and cancers? The long and short of it is, I don't know. Yes, we live in a broken world. I know that. But why did the lorry come round the corner just as the child was crossing the road to go to school? Why does a teenager have to watch his father descend into terminal dementia? I don't know. But why? But if I knew everything, then I would be God. And if you knew the answer to every question, you would be God. But neither you nor I are God. Christianity isn't called a faith for no reason. You nor I will never have the answer to everything, especially on the issue of suffering. There will be gaps in which we need to accept not knowing. But wait, hope is not lost. Because when we experience that suffering, we can turn to the one who suffered for us. Christ went to the cross for you, for me, for us all. He did that so you can invite him into your life. You can feel the peace in which he brings. He can bring the clarity in the fog. He can bring strength in times of weakness. He can bring comfort in times of affliction. The world is broken. We are broken. Christ was broken, but because he was, we can be healed. Because he endured all, we can find peace. He can do that because he did it himself. He went to the cross so you can have a personal relationship with him. Because, like Christ, we all suffer. We may have felt despised. We've all felt rejected. We may have experienced sorrow. Grief has touched us all. Some may even be chastised, oppressed, or afflicted. And so I would encourage you this morning to turn to Christ. Cast your suffering and burdens upon him, because it was Jesus who said in John 16:33, I have told you these things, so that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have trouble, but take heart, for I have overcome the world. Amen.